I'm going to share with you a few stories that I've experienced and some lessons learned, and then a few final bits of advice to send you on your way. Now, before we get into the meat, I want to throw up a little definition here. So I asked you all how many of you think you're entrepreneurs. So I went and I pulled the bog standard definition of entrepreneur from the dictionary. One who organizes, manages, and assumes the risk of a business or enterprise. And by the way, a lot of the things I'm going to say, you've heard in maybe slightly different interpretations, but you've heard a lot of the same concepts over the course of the last day and a half. So the point there is that it's not an infinite subject matter, but there are some key points that those of us who are speaking feel the need to drive home, and that should resonate with you, I hope. What I found interesting, too, is that the origin of the word is from the Old French, entreprendre, which means to undertake. And I'm very thankful that we didn't actually do an English translation of that word, because then you'd all be undertakers. Now, that definition actually left me rather dry. So I've recast it a little bit, and you'll see some words that in my redefinition that are rather similar to some things you've heard over the course of the last day and a half. This is my interpretation of what an entrepreneur is. It's someone who creates. You've heard the word creativity, creates a lot. Someone who creates something from nothing, puts a thought or idea into tangible working form, often with the aim of solving an observed problem, usually through a vehicle called an enterprise. And entrepreneurs' enterprises can take many shapes and forms and structures, and we've talked about that a little bit. But that leaves me a little bit happier, because it adds a little bit more of the excitement that is associated with being an entrepreneur, and it infuses the element of creativity. One thing that is clear is that being an entrepreneur is not an antiseptic or mundane existence. Sometimes it can pose trials that are extraordinary, but they are never mundane, at least not in my experience. I thought, while I have this up, I would mention a little bit about an entrepreneur who I had the pleasure of meeting several weeks ago, because it kind of exemplifies the idea of creativity, putting a thought into action, and also overcoming what I consider to be tremendous barriers of entry. So if you'll endure me this little sidebar. So several weeks ago, I met a fellow named Hamdi Ulukaya. Not your typical Joe Smith American name. He happens to live in the United States. He's a Turkish immigrant. Has anyone ever heard of Hamdi Ulukaya? Didn't think so. Hamdi he's a Turkish immigrant, came to the United States in the early noughties, and in 2008 started a business. He started a business, and I should mention that he grew up on a dairy farm in Turkey. And he wanted to do something. He had very few resources. He wanted to do something entrepreneurial. So what did he do? But he said, well, I have an idea of an unmet need in this large country called the United States. And he decided to enter the consumer products business, specifically the yogurt business. Now, that sort of a product has tremendous barriers of entry in a country like the United States, because there are a lot of really big players in it. And but he had this idea. He said, where I come from, Greek-style yogurt is the thing that we all eat. It's really good for you. It's got twice, maybe 3 times the protein in some cases of regular yogurt. And nobody in the United States is delivering a product that combines all of the good protein that Greek yogurt has with no fat. And Americans like no fat. So this guy figured out a way to acquire a manufacturing facility using a government program. okay? Had very little money of his own. This was a shut-down facility that one of the big companies had just let go by the wayside. It was up for auction, so he bought it for next to nothing, and he found government funding through the Small Business Administration in the States to do it, okay? We're not talking tons of money here. He hired back 4 or 5 employees from that mothballed facility to work with him in coming up with a product. And this is only 2008, and the US economy, as you know, was in pretty dire straits then. Well, he worked on it for about 1.5 years to come up with the product development, come up with the flavors and all of this stuff, and come up with the product. And then he went to market. And what has happened since then is nothing short of amazing. That product, called Chobani yogurt, has skyrocketed to the #1 brand in the United States, surpassing Danone, surpassing Yoplait, and all of the others out there. Okay? It was fascinating to hear this guy talk, because what he told me was, he said, you know, there were times during that first 1.5 years, I contemplated suicide. It was that difficult. He was working 20-hour days, and very, very challenging. So another takeaway is that entrepreneurship is not always a bed of roses. But this one has a very happy ending, because he's #1. He employs about 4,000 people in the United States now, built the largest single yogurt production facility in the country, transformed the entire dairy industry of the state of New York in order to satisfy his consumption needs, or his raw material needs. And less than a year ago, I understand that he was offered, and it's not for sale, but he was offered over $3 billion US to buy that company. So when there are obstacles, you can overcome them. And this is just a guy who had a good idea and saw an opportunity in a problem. So